Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of ECH Debate. This week, we had the trade deadline Monday, so today, of course, we got to talk about some of the aftershocks of that. So this week we're talking about three teams that either made moves or in one case didn't make any moves, and how that really affected their projected protection lists, and of course what that'll mean for the Seattle Kraken. So first, I think the biggest story, at least for me, of trade deadline Monday was that Nashville did not move Matthias Ekholm, because I think that seemed like something that was a foregone conclusion to everybody before the season started. Was, hey, look, they're not going to be able to keep him and Dante Fabro and all this stuff. Will they keep four defensemen? It's so hard because then you're losing so many more forwards. And lo and behold, here we are. They're 4 points into a playoff spot, even though that playoff spot is just going to lead to being destroyed by Carolina or Tampa Bay in the first round. And David Poile decided, hey, you know what? We're going to go for it for some reason. And so they didn't move Matthias Ekholm. And then RJ, what did he have to say about not moving him?
Well, interesting quote from Poyle post trade deadline when asked about the prospect of maybe losing Matthias Ekholm in the expansion draft, which now we thought would be likely. He said, "quote We're not losing Ekholm in expansion." So, okay then.
Yep.
Uh, so I guess what that means is that either he's got some sort of prearranged deal with Ron Francis where they have an understanding at this point, and that would be expensive for sure, given what Ekholm's value we know to be. Or they're gonna try and go with the four forward, four defenseman, that eight skater protection option, and that's gonna leave a lot of forwards exposed and some very interesting options for the Kraken.
Yeah, I mean, I think in no matter how this goes down, it benefits the Kraken because they're either going to have their pick of a lot of forwards, or, as you said, they've already kind of made some sort of deal, and I have to think that that deal will greatly benefit Ron Francis and the Kraken, whatever it may be. But as far as who's going to be available for Seattle now, because of course we previously had Matthias Ekholm as kind of the, well, he'll be the pick, but we all thought he was going to be moved, and obviously now he
Right.
wasn't. We both agree that they're going to be keeping the four defensemen. And as far as forwards, we also agree that they're most likely, or at least if we were doing it, they would be keeping Philip Forsberg, Victor Arvidsson, Luke Kunin, and Kalle Yarncroke. So that leaves some kind of big names available, some that, they're household names, although we can argue about how good they've been the last couple years or so, such as Matt Duchene and Ryan Johansson. It means somebody like Colton Sissons is going to be available. Nick Cousins. There's a lot of guys on this roster that you could see a Seattle being interested in, but of course, in our latest projected roster video that I'll link down below, we have Seattle taking Ryan Johansson.
Right. And obviously the two most interesting names are the big money names, Ryan Johansson and Matt Duchene. Both of them have $8 million cap hit. Johansson for another 4 years after this one. And the real question is going to come down to, are these guys going to be worth the money? Their play in both cases has kind of fallen off recently. And I think you have to look at, well, whether that is, a result of, the team not doing well, or, being unlucky, or, what the case is with that, and what's the likelihood that they're going to be able to kind of regain their prior form with the Kraken. And I think in the case of Johansson, looking at his numbers, I mean, his possession numbers are more or less, the same as they've been throughout his whole career. And his scoring is way down. But you look at the key number that I like to look at is on ice shooting percentage. And it's down to a 6.7 this season, and his career number is over 9%, which suggests to me that maybe he's been more unlucky than bad this season, and that in the long term, you could expect that number to kind of rebound toward his career average. And that's why I think he might be worth taking a flyer on if you're the Kraken.
Yeah, I agree. For me, he's the guy that I would want Seattle to take. He's the guy that I would be taking a flyer on. I agree. I think there's a couple guys around the league this year that have just had some really bad luck when it comes to scoring. I think he's one of them. Um, yes, there are things to be concerned about. He hasn't had a 20-goal season since 2015. That's a little worrisome, right? It's
Right.
been 6 years, but you go back just a couple seasons ago, and he was scoring 64 points, and everything was fine in that regard. I think one of the things that's affecting both him and really everyone as we talk about this Nashville team is the fact that they have so many guys who have been injured and in and out of this lineup. There's been virtually no consistency, particularly in their top six, all season long because guys just continually have been getting injured. Right as one guy gets healthy, two more go down, and I think that's also kind of playing a role in it, which is also why it's kind of remarkable that they're in the position they're in at all right now.
Right. I mean, looking at their IR, you've got your best forward, Philip Forsberg, on injured reserve right now. Duchesne on injured reserve. It's amazing that they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. So I think the other thing is, Ryan Johansson, he's only 28. It's not like he's old. It's not like, we should be really seeing like, oh, this decline is related to his age and he's slowing down and all that stuff. It might just be as simple as he needs a change of scenery. We've seen that work for tons of guys before. I don't see a reason why it couldn't work for him.
Right.
So that's Nashville. Now let's talk about the team that they are competing for that so coveted fourth Central Division playoff spot in the Chicago Blackhawks. Now they were much more active at the trade deadline. They were one of the most active teams, and when I look at their roster as far as who they're going to have to protect, particularly if we're looking at them, at least wanting to probably protect the people they just gave up assets for, I'm seeing that there's not enough spots for everybody, RJ.
Right. There's going to be at least one, probably two odd guys out here, given guys that they just acquired. I think looking at our protection list, we have Taves and Kane, obviously with the no move clauses. DeBrincat and Strome are kind of shoo-ins for those spots. And then I think you have Brandon Hagel, who's really played his way into being protected.
Agreed.
And after that, you've got two spots left. And as I see it, you've got five guys potentially filling those two spots. You've got Henrik Borgstrom, who was kind of the centerpiece of that cap-related deal with the Panthers. You've got Alex Nylander, who, I think we've kind of forgotten about him this season. He hasn't played a game this season, but I know that they still believe in him and believe in what upside he can bring once he comes back from that injury. You've got David Kampf, who's been a great defensive center for them this season, and I think one of the more underrated players on that roster. You've got Adam Gaudette, who they just brought in at the deadline in exchange for Matthew Highmore. And you've got Brett Connolly, who, even though he was a bit of a cap dump, he can certainly still play and contribute some goals. So if he really kind of turns it on with the Blackhawks, maybe he's someone they consider protecting as well.
Yeah, I really like Brett Connolly as a player. I've liked him for years, but I think for me, he would be the easy one to kind of leave off the list. A lot for me hinges on Alex Nylander, and not just the health of his knee that he had surgery on, and that's why he's missed all of the season up to this point, but also just, he's already on his second team. He was only drafted, 5 years ago. He's already on his second team, and while he was starting to finally show some signs last season in Chicago, he still hasn't really shown us that he was worthy of being a top 10 pick. Like, the skill that we know he possesses has just not translated at all to the NHL level. And that concerns me. As far as the two guys that they just brought in, you would think if you just traded for someone, knowing that this expansion draft is coming, you would probably protect them. But I don't know that they can afford to protect both Gaudette and Bjorkstrom. If you had to pick one of them to protect, who would you take?
I would take Borgstrom, mostly for the upside there. I mean, he's still a former first-round pick that you haven't really got to see what he can do in North America yet. He's been out playing in Europe, and really, why make the Connolly deal if you're not confident you can protect him? Given you're taking on that Connolly contract beyond this year, he's the main asset you got in return for that. Versus Gaudette, I mean, the fact they gave up Matthew Highmore, and he's a good fourth liner, but I mean, that's really his ceiling. It kind of shows what they think of Gaudette, maybe value wise. That's all they had to give up for him. So I think just looking at the returns on the deal, I think you can see more Borgstrom's a more valuable player.
Agreed. I agree with that. I would keep Bjorkstrom over Gaudette, even though I really do like Adam Gaudette, and I think he's got a good future. Um, I'm I would keep David Kampf, however it's
Okay.
said, but that's just me. I value those kinds of bottom six centers that you can throw out there 60% of the time in your own zone, and somehow it's always ending up in the offensive zone by the time he's off the ice. And I think that's very valuable. I think maybe Bowman knows that, given that he built so many great Chicago teams there. But again, you're talking then, yeah, you're losing out on Nylander, you're losing out
Or
on
Gaudette.
Gaudette. There's no way to keep those guys if you're doing that.
Right. I think no matter how you slice it, the Kraken are going to get someone who's, either like a valuable bottom six guy or has got the high upside, like of a first round pick, like Nylander.
Yeah, but I think if we're talking it coming down to one of those kind of three guys, yeah, I mean, I think Seattle wins with any of them. I think they're going to be better picks than we're going to be seeing from some of the other NHL teams as far as Seattle goes.
Agreed.
So now let's move on to the final team we're going to discuss today, and that's the Philadelphia Flyers. Um, they're an interesting team, sort of similar to Nashville. They have some kind of more aging stars on some pretty big contracts. Do we think Seattle's going to take a look at either a James Van Riemsdyk or even a Jakub Voracek if he's available?
Right. I think the Flyers are going to expose those two, and especially with re-signing Scott Lawton. They weren't too active trade wise at the deadline, but that Lawton extension is a big move, especially as it relates to the Kraken, because he is going to take up an expansion draft protection spot now, and that's going to bump one of their other forwards out of the mix. And I think the Flyers, it's kind of funny how they've approached this as far as expansion draft with their forward group. It's a very deep forward group, and I think they've kind of approached it as, we just don't care. We're gonna make sure we have as many skilled forwards as we can, and we're just not going to worry about it. We're going to lose one, and so be it. They don't even seem worried about it expansion draft wise. But of course, the Kraken can benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it's going to come down to, like with the Nashville situation, is it worth taking the bait on one of those big money guys like a Voracek or a Van Riemsdyk, or do you go with a cheaper option like a Nicholas Aube-Kubel? And for me, I would go with Aube-Kubel. I would not take the bait on those big money guys. And the difference is that I really like Aube-Kubel and what he brings. We were just talking about how we really respect those kind of players that you can start them in their own zone 65% of the time, and the puck's always ending up in the other team zone. And that's what Aube-Kubel does. He plays tough minutes. And he just gets the puck out of his own zone, and he's a valuable player like that. And he's a bargain. He's just over $1 million cap hit versus you're talking about $7 million for Van Riemsdyk, $8 million for Voracek. I think the equation there just swings more toward Aube-Kubel in a way it doesn't with the Nashville guys. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Voracek's out just because of his age. You don't want to bring in a guy who's going to be 32 next season for a team that we know is going to take a couple years to reach, true contention. I think that's, Van Riemsdyk's actually the same age, so the same applies to him.
But he is the Flyers' leading scorer, so
right.
What do you think?
Right. He's showing that he's still putting up numbers in a way Voracek is not, and so that does give you a little bit of pause. I'm with you though. I think it comes down to Aube-Kubel or Lindblom, Oscar Lindblom.
Right.
And I think if I was Philadelphia, I would keep Aube-Kubel, but I have a feeling that they won't. They don't seem, and they haven't exactly acted as though they are one of the more analytic, savvy organizations in the league. So I don't know how much they're gonna, value what Kubel brings to the to the table for them, and they'll just look at kind of the slightly higher scoring numbers of Lindblom and decide to keep him. But I think either way, it's going to come down to that decision between who they keep between those two guys, and I think Seattle should just take whichever one is exposed.
Agreed.
So that's those are our thoughts on kind of some of three of the teams that after Monday's trade deadline were kind of in interesting spots as far as having, maybe one or two, or in Chicago's case potentially up to three assets that they're going to have to leave unprotected that we might want Seattle to take, or in Nashville's case, just throwing caution to the wind to make sure that they're the ones that are swept by Carolina in the first round of the playoffs. Everything else be damned. So
Kraken's benefit, though.
It is. All of these situations benefit the Kraken greatly because it means they're either going to be getting a significant asset to not take somebody, or they're going to be able to take a good player that should help them win year one. So it's all good stuff.
At the end of the day, I think the Kraken are in a better spot post deadline than before the trade deadline, which is not something I expected going into it.
No, and if we were to think that, we would have thought it was kind of because maybe some stuff was announced, or even potentially more obvious as far as situations where it's like, hey, you know what? They probably have some deal with Seattle, and that's why they made this specific deal. But really haven't heard much about that.
Right.
It's still pretty quiet on that front, but as we were saying, there's even more teams than these three that are going to be in situations now where they're going to have to decide, is it worth giving up a draft pick and a prospect to keep this guy, or are we going to just let Seattle take him? And that's where you want Seattle to be at this point.
Absolutely.
You want them to have those. Yeah. So thanks for joining us. Make sure to like this video, comment down below if you agree with us, especially if you disagree with us. It's always good to have that kind of discourse, and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss all of our other Seattle hockey content, and we'll see you next time.